chapter 6 from Genesis from Kardec. Moons, and after this, comets. All, all people like to see comets in heaven. I like it so much. See comets. I never saw various comets, but some comets I saw in my life. And moons, before the planetary masses had attained a degree of cooling sufficient for their solidification. Let me stop here. Don't will use more of this. Before the planetary masses had attained a degree of cooling sufficient for the solidification, smaller masses, veritable liquid globules, became detached from some of the equatorial plane, where the centrifugal force is greatest, and by virtue of the same laws acquire a movement of translation around their generating planet, as had occurred with those planets around their generating central star. This is how the Earth gave birth to its moon, whose considerably lesser mass underwent a more rapid cooling. Now then, the laws and forces that presided over its detachment from the Earth's equator and its movement of translation on the same plane acted in such a way that instead of taking off a spheroid shape, it took on the shape of an ovoid globe. The elongated shape of an egg, whose center of gravity would be fixed in the lower part, because this we only see one side of the moon. The conditions under which the detachment of the moon was effected allowed it barely to pull away from the earth and constrained it to remain perpetually suspended in Earth's sky, like an ovoid figure, whose heaviest parts formed the lower face turned toward the earth, and whose less dense parts comprised the top. If one means the side opposite the earth are pointed toward the heavens. This is what makes this heavenly body always show the same side to us. To better understand its geological state, it can be pictured as being a ball of cork, whose base turned toward the earth would be made of lead. Thus, there are two essentially distinct natures to the moon's surface. One without any possible similarity to ours because it's fluidic and ethereal. Bodies are unknown. In those times was unknown because no one is still in 1866 more or less No one was made a voyage there. The other side, light in relation to the Earth, since all the less dense substances settled in that hemisphere. The former perpetually turned towards the Earth without water or atmosphere, except maybe here and there at the boundaries of the subterrestrial hemisphere. The latter, the latter, rich in fluids, perpetually turned away from our world. Have great craters with deep sides and with ice, cause don't have nothing sun in this part of the moon. The number and the state of the moons of each planet varied in accordance with the special conditions under which they were formed. Some planets didn't give birth to any secondary heavenly body, as is the case of Mercury, Venus, and Mars, while others like Earth, Jupiter, Saturn formed one or more. Beside its own satellites or moons, 31, 30. Here are the number. I will go back in text. The former perpetually turning toward the Earth without water or atmosphere, except maybe here and there at the boundaries of this subterrestrial hemisphere, the latter, rich in fluids, perpetually turned away from our world. And have a note about it. I don't read. This entirely new theory about the moon explains in those times, explains through the law of gravity the reason why this heavenly body always shows the same face to the earth. In center of the gravity, instead of being at the center of the sphere, rests no one of the points of its surface, and consequently attracted toward the earth by a force greater than the lighter parts. The moon would produce the effects of one of those figures commonly called pulsars, holy polies, or bobcats in the US, whose heavier base makes them always pop right back up, whereas the planets, whose center of gravity is at equal distance from their surface, turn regularly on their axis. The gaseous or liquid vivifying fluids, as a consequence of their specific lightness, would be found accumulated in the upper hemisphere, continuously turning away from the earth. The lower hemisphere, the only one we see, would be devoid of such fluids and therefore inappropriate for life, while it would rain on the other. Hence, if the upper hemisphere is inhabited, its inhabitants have never seen the earth unless they traveled to the other hemisphere, something impossible for them if there are no conditions indispensable to life, in human life. As rational and scientific as this theory maybe since it cannot yet be confirmed by any direct observation, it can be accepted only as a hypothesis. In those times was hypothesis, and as an idea that can serve as a reference to science. It must be agreed that is the only one at this time that gives a satisfactory explanation for the particularities this globe displays. This is were not from Kardec. Was right in 1866 or 77. Besides its own satellites or moons, the planet Saturn displays the special phenomenon of its ring system. Have a note from this. Have another note in Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Some planets didn't give birth to any secondary heavenly body, as is the case of Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Have a note, this was writing before the 1877 discovery of the two moons of Mars, named Phobos and Deimos. This is note of traductor. Let me see. Beside while others like Earth, Jupiter, Saturn formed one or more plan, one or more second heavenly body. Besides its own satellites or moons, the planet Saturn displays the special phenomenon of its ring system. Have a note of this. The rings of Saturn have puzzled astronomers since Galileo Galilei discovered them with his telescope in 16110. Detailed study by the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 spacecraft in the 1980 only increased the mystery. There are thousands of rings made of billions of particles of ice and rock. So beautiful this. The particles range in size from a grain of sugar to the size of a house. The rings of a house, yes, the rings are believed to be pieces of comets, asteroids, and shattered moons that broke up before they reached the planet. Each ring orbits at a different speed around the planet's source. This is where right to traductor. They still have put in this text more information. Is more or less this book from these informations was, let me see the year, so old, this copy. Let me see. Here. it's a 5 edition, 1878. I have 18 years. 1819. 18, no. I was that or I was in another body this year. It was 1978. 1978 was the principle that the start when I start to study these books, and which seen from afar appears to encircle, besides its own satellites or moons, the planet Saturn displays the special phenomenon of its ring systems, which seen from afar appears to encircle it like a white aureole. This formation is a new demonstration of the universality of the laws of nature. The ring is actually the result of a separation effectuated on Saturn's equator in primitive times, in the same way what an equatorial zone escaped on Earth to form its satellite. The difference is that Saturn's ring is formed in all of its parts of homogeneous molecules, probably already in a certain degree of condensation. And could there be continue its rotational movement in the same way and within a time almost equal to that which animates the planet? If one of these points of the rings had been denser than another, one or many agglomerations of substances would have suddenly occurred, and Saturn would have had many more moons since the time of its formation. This ring has solidified in the same way as the other planetary bodies and comets. Now, wandering heavenly bodies, even more so than the planets that have retained that etymological level. Comets are the guides that will help us cross the boundaries of the system to which the Earth belongs in order to carry us to far off regions in the sidereal expanse. But before exploring the heavenly realms with the aid of these travelers of the universe, it would be good to understand as much as possible their intrinsic nature and their role in the planetary economy. These birded heavenly bodies have often been seen as being infant worlds, brewing in their primordial cause the conditions for life and existence that are bestowed on the inhabited worlds. Others have imagined these extraordinary bodies to be worlds in a state of destruction, and for many their striking appearance has been the subject of erroneous speculation concerning their nature, so much so that even in judicial astrology, Some use it to regard them as portents of disasters sent by providential decrees to the astonished and trembling earth. The law of variety is applied with such great profusion in the world, in the works of nature, that one wonders how naturalists, astronomers, and philosophers could have erected so many theories to give comets a status equivalent to planetary bodies, and to see them as nothing but heavenly bodies in a greater or lesser degree of development or decay. However, the pictures of nature should be ample enough to keep the observer from the need to look for relationships that don't exist, and to leave to comets the humble but useful rule of wandering heavenly bodies, serving as scouts for the solar domains. Because the heavenly bodies of which they are made are altogether different from that of planetary bodies, they don't have like them the purpose of serving as dwellings for humanities. They travel successively from sun to sun, enriching themselves at times with planetary fragments reduced to the state of vapor, drawing to themselves the vivifying and renewing principles that they shed over terrestrial worlds. If when one of those heavenly bodies approaches our tiny globe to traverse its orbit and return to its apogee, located at an incommensurable distance from the sun, we were to follow it through, thus to visit with in the sidereal regions. We would cross this prodigious expanse of material matter that separates the sun from the closest stars. And in observing the combined movements of this heavenly body, which we could imagine as being astray in the desert of the infinite, we would find there another eloquent proof of the universality of the laws of nature, carried out at distance that the most active imagination can hardly conceive. There, the elliptical form takes on the parabolic form, and its progress is slowed down to the point that the comet travels only a few yards in the same amount of time which at its perigee it traveled many thousands of miles. Perhaps a more powerful sun, more important than the one that it has just left behind, will exercise over this comet a preponderant attraction and receiving it into the ranks of its own subjects. And then the confused children of your tiny earth will wait in vain for its return, which they had predicted through incomplete observations. In that case, we whose thus has followed the wandering comet in those unknown regions will encounter a new nation impossible for earthly eyes to find, unimaginable for the spirits who inhabit the earth, inconceivable even to their thoughts because it will be the theater of unexplored marvels. We have arrived at the stellar world, that dazzling world of vast suns which radiate in infinite space, and which are the brilliant flowers of the magnificent grounds of creation. Only there we will know what the earth is. Then finish the chapter I read in Portuguese until there. And the next I will talk or read the Milky Way. On beautiful moonless starry nights, everyone can see that whitish glow which crosses the heavens from one end to the other. And first time I saw the Milky Way was in Apipe or in net. Never real in places that I live in, because the illumination is not possible. And I know that Milky Way are here in back of my building. Then I will saw this. If I would saw as was a palette reunion of the stars, is this. Maybe I saw this when I was a children, and we play at night in my street, because my street don't were open. The street I grew were closed. Only you can enter and go out to the same way. Don't have don't have exit in my street. It was so good because we can ever play in at night in front of our house. No one arrived there. Only residents in those streets. Was so bad, so good. Leave it in a street without exit. Marvelous. Then I hope you have a great final week. And the next week, I will read so much more from Genesis, from Kardec, and the alcoholism. Alcoholism and smoking addiction are soon finished, what Hamati said about it. But meet and continue more. Until the next. God bless all and have a great weekend.